Will the Green New Deal usher in a better form of democracy and economics? Or will world leaders use this time in history as an opportunity to exert control over the human race in the form of surveillance? We are facing a global emergency. Our scientists tell us that human-induced climate change, brought on by industrial agriculture, has taken the human race and our fellow species into the sixth mass extinction event of life on Earth. Yet few people alive today are even aware of this emerging reality. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC, a scientific body of the United Nations, issued a dire warning in October of 2018 that global warming emissions are accelerating and that we are on the verge of a series of escalating climatic events imperiling life on the planet. The IPCC estimates that human activity has caused the temperature to rise 1 degree C above pre-industrial levels and predicted that if it crosses a threshold beyond 1.5 degrees C, it will unleash runaway feedback loops and a cascading climate change events that would decimate the Earth's ecosystems. There will be no return to the kind of life we know today. The extinction of species by human activity continues to accelerate, fast enough to eliminate more than half of all species by the end of this century. The last time Earth experienced an extinction event of this magnitude was 65 million years ago. The IPCC concluded that to avoid environmental abyss, we would have to cut emissions of global warming gases by 45% from 2012 levels, and we only have 8 years left to make this happen. This will require transformation in our global economy, our society, and our very way of life, without precedent in human history. In other words, the human race faces a razor-thin timeline for radical reorientation of civilization. The sole purpose of the Green New Deal is to allow Wall Street the better ability to predict the economy through enhanced surveillance and the Internet of Things. The obsession of Wall Street is to use false models loosely based on calculus and physics to attempt to predict human behavior in order to foresee where it is best to invest. Yet, it is obvious that the further that we try to predict into the future, the more bewildering the task of predicting becomes. The anti-scientific and greedy neoclassical model is the antithesis to biophysical economics, due to the fact that biophysical economics looks into the past and present for data, rather than attempting to look in the future, in the fashion of neoclassical economics physics envy, in which calculus is misused in an attempt to predict the stock market. Biophysical economics can be described as a system of economic analysis that is based on the biological and physical properties, structures, and processes of real economic systems as its conceptual base and foundational model. It has two components: biophysical science itself and economic analysis that is consistent with science and other social sciences, such as psychology and anthropology. It acknowledges that the basis for nearly all wealth is nature, and views most human activity as a means to increase, directly or indirectly, the exploitation of nature to generate more wealth. If wealth comes from natural resource exploitation and not from the economist's view of free market efficiency, then the concept of development must be very tightly tied to soils, climate, agricultural potential, mineral resources, and other biophysical resources that tend to be given the short shrift in economic conventional analysis. As it currently stands, without a Green New Deal, the world economy has no plan B. We're constrained on every side. Our appetite for energy is enormously and quickly growing. We're deeply dependent on oil to satisfy this appetite, yet oil supply is tightening quickly. It is clear that the business as usual model will push us past the tipping point in which the effects of climate change will be irreversible. Kofi Annan, Secretary General of the United Nations, addressed the World Summit on Sustainable Development in Johannesburg, South Africa in 2012 with these words: "A path to prosperity that ravages the environment and leaves the majority of humankind behind in squalor will soon prove to be a dead end for everyone. Unsustainable practices are woven deeply into the fabric of modern life. Some say we should rip up that fabric. I say we can and must weave in new strands of knowledge and cooperation. Systematically weaving together the needs of stakeholders with shareholders reinforces the fabric of our society. The values of social justice, environmental preservation, and economic security should reinforce each other rather than understanding these as independent issues. It should not need be a question of choosing among them. It is clear that we can solve the climate crisis and do it in ways that are profitable." The first and most frequently asked question when debating the transition into a green infrastructure is generally always, who's going to pay for it? Simply put, a good portion of the financing needed to build out the new infrastructure will come from global pension funds. On the current path humanity is headed, nobody's going to be able to retire on a dead planet anyway, so retirement pensions are already a stranded asset. In order to achieve this, the federal government should enact legislation to establish a national green bank that can provide funds to state, county, and municipal green banks that in turn can leverage those funds in securing sufficient financing and especially public and private pension funds and other investment capital for scaled infrastructure green buildouts. The evidence is clear that we have the solutions to offset all of the carbon stored in the atmosphere. The techniques to accomplish zero carbon emissions are rather simple. Under the Green New Deal, the federal government and state governments should establish and deploy plans to phase out petroleum chemical agriculture and introduce organic and ecological agricultural practices and boost regional agricultural production for local markets over a 20-year period, with the goal of moving toward 100% organic certification by 2040. The federal government and state government should provide deep subsidies and robust incentives to encourage a speedy transition. The federal government and state government should provide tax credits, carbon credits, and other incentives to encourage farmers to utilize carbon farming techniques and to reforest and rewild marginal land and capture and sequester CO2 from the atmosphere and serve as carbon capture sinks. The federal government should also reprioritize the use of public lands by reforesting where applicable to capture and sequester CO2 emissions. The transition into the third industrial revolution will not be easy, but we have a moral obligation and a social responsibility to future generations to leave the earth a better place than we found it. The complications associated with implementing policy related to justice is that, often, justice for one group means injustice for another group. We face a transition that could decide the fate of humanity, moving toward freedom and democracy, or falling further into a state of totalitarianism and tyranny under elitist control. But if we stand by idly and do nothing, there will not be a future at all. It is clear that we can solve the climate crisis and do it in ways that are profitable. To anyone who realizes how dire the climate crisis is, the Green New Deal is exciting. The possibility that respecting and using the services of intact ecosystems might save us is almost a miracle.